In every affair, there are carefully maintained boundaries between the separate worlds we create, walls we build to keep our lives from colliding, and elaborate systems of compartmentalization that allow us to live double lives without getting caught. But sometimes those walls crumble. Sometimes the worlds we've worked so hard to keep separate collide with catastrophic force. And sometimes the deception we've constructed so carefully implodes in ways we never imagined possible, bringing together the two people we've been betraying in the same space. At the same time, creating a confrontation so explosive that everyone caught in the blast radius is forever changed. This is the story of how one man's attempt to control an uncontrollable situation led to the most shocking Family Feud episode in the show's history. How his wife and his mistress ended up on the same team without knowing about each other until it was too late. And how Steve Harvey found himself mediating the most volatile and painful confrontation he'd ever witnessed. A moment so charged with betrayal, rage, and devastation that it left everyone questioning how such a situation could even happen. Before we dive into this explosive story about deception, compartmentalization, and what happens when the separate lives we've been living collide in the most public way possible, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Because what you're about to hear is a stark reminder that infidelity built on lies and manipulation will eventually collapse under its own weight, and that the crash, when it finally does, is always more destructive than we could have predicted. The Washington family from Houston, Texas, was selected to appear on Family Feud in November 2025 through what appeared to be a typical application process. But the circumstances of their selection were anything but typical. The application had been submitted by 37-year-old Marcus Washington, a charismatic real estate agent with the kind of smooth talking charm that made him successful in sales and equally successful in manipulating the people around him. Marcus had been married to his wife Nicole for 12 years, a marriage that had produced 2 children and had appeared stable and happy to everyone who knew them. Nicole, 35 years old, was a devoted wife and mother who worked as a dental hygienist, managing their household with efficiency while supporting Marcus's demanding career. She trusted her husband completely, never imagining that for the past 2.5 years, Marcus had been conducting an affair with a 28-year-old woman named Tasha Williams, a receptionist at a competing real estate agency whom he'd met at an industry networking event. The affair had been intense and ongoing, with Marcus maintaining elaborate lies to both women to keep his double life functioning. He told Nicole he was working late, meeting clients, or attending real estate conferences when he was actually with Tasha. He told Tasha that he was separated from his wife and planning to divorce, that they just needed to wait for the right time, that his wife didn't understand him the way Tasha did. Marcus had compartmentalized his life so effectively that he'd convinced himself he could maintain both relationships indefinitely, that he loved both women in different ways, and that he deserved to have everything he wanted without having to choose or face consequences. The Family Feud application represented Marcus's most audacious and reckless gamble, yet, born from his growing overconfidence in his ability to manipulate situations and control outcomes. He'd submitted the application listing himself as team captain, his wife Nicole, his younger brother James, and crucially, needing 2 more family members, he'd listed his cousin, Tasha Williams, and her friend Deshawn. The application had explained that Tasha was a distant cousin from his father's side who'd recently moved to Houston and was becoming close with the family. It was a lie, but Marcus had assumed that either they wouldn't be selected, or if they were, he could somehow manage the situation, keep Nicole and Tasha from interacting too much, and maintain his deception even on a game show stage. It was the height of narcissistic delusion, the belief that he was so skilled at manipulation that he could actually pull off having his wife and his mistress on the same team without either discovering the truth. When the Washington family was selected to appear, Marcus had tried to back out, suddenly recognizing the insanity of what he'd set in motion. But Nicole had been so excited, had already told friends and family, and backing out would have required explanations he couldn't give. So Marcus had convinced himself he could control the situation, could keep Nicole and Tasha separated enough that they wouldn't talk much, could get through one afternoon without his lies exploding. Tasha, for her part, had believed Marcus when he'd told her that Nicole knew about their relationship, that the marriage was essentially over, and that appearing together on Family Feud was actually Nicole's idea to maintain appearances while they finalized the divorce. It was an absurd lie, but Tasha wanted to believe it, wanted to believe that Marcus was actually leaving his wife as he'd been promising for 2.5 years. So she'd accepted his explanation despite its obvious implausibility. The day of the taping, Marcus was a nervous wreck, though he hid it behind his usual charismatic facade. Nicole arrived excited and friendly, greeting everyone warmly, meeting cousin Tasha for the first time and making conversation about how nice it was to finally meet family members from Marcus's extended family. Tasha, playing the role of distant cousin, was polite but awkward, shooting glances at Marcus that Nicole didn't quite understand, but that made her vaguely uncomfortable. The pre-show rehearsal was tense, at least for those who knew what was really happening. Marcus positioned himself between Nicole and Tasha as much as possible, tried to dominate conversations to prevent the two women from talking directly to each other, and radiated an anxiety that he tried to pass off as game show nerves. James, Marcus's brother, sensed something was off with his brother's energy but couldn't pinpoint what. Deshawn, Tasha's friend who knew about the affair and the real nature of her relationship with Marcus, looked increasingly uncomfortable as he watched the deception play out, realizing that this situation was going to end badly. The game started with the Washington family competing against another family, everyone taking their positions on stage. Steve Harvey, as always, was working his charm, getting to know the families and creating energy. When he asked Marcus to introduce his team members, Marcus did so with practiced ease, introducing his wife Nicole with obvious affection, his brother James, and then smoothly lying about Tasha being his cousin and her friend Deshawn. Nicole stood beside her husband, smiling and proud, completely oblivious to the fact that the woman standing a few feet away was the person Marcus had been sleeping with for 2.5 years. The first round went smoothly enough, with answers being given and points being scored. But the cracks in Marcus's facade began to show during the second round, when contestants were encouraged to celebrate and physically interact after correct answers. When Tasha gave a good answer and Marcus high-fived her with slightly too much enthusiasm and familiarity, Nicole noticed. When Marcus touched Tasha's shoulder in a way that seemed intimate rather than familial, Nicole felt a flicker of something, not quite suspicion but unease, a sense that something wasn't quite right about the interaction she was witnessing. During a break between rounds, Nicole did what any curious person would do when meeting new family members. She tried to get to know Tasha better, asking questions about her background, where she was from, how she was related to Marcus's father's side of the family. Tasha, unprepared for this interrogation and not briefed thoroughly enough by Marcus on the cover story, began giving answers that didn't quite add up. She couldn't name Marcus's father correctly, fumbled on details about Houston that should have been familiar if she'd really lived there recently, and seemed uncomfortable with the entire line of questioning. Nicole, not accusatory but confused, turned to Marcus. "Honey, I thought you said Tasha was from your dad's side, but she doesn't seem to know Uncle Raymond." Marcus, caught off guard, stammered an explanation about it being a distant connection. Maybe he'd misspoken about which side of the family. It was complicated. His obvious discomfort and the weakness of his explanation triggered Nicole's intuition in ways that months of subtle signs had never quite managed. Something was very wrong here. The moment that shattered Marcus's carefully constructed deception came in the third round, when Steve asked a question that would prove catastrophic. "Name something you might keep secret from your spouse." It was a question designed to get humorous answers about hidden purchases, surprise parties, or minor infractions. But Tasha, who'd been growing increasingly anxious about the situation and whose judgment was impaired by stress, buzzed in and gave an answer that came from her actual experience rather than from strategic game show thinking. "That you're not really his cousin, you're his girlfriend," Tasha said, the words coming out before she fully processed what she was saying or where she was. The studio fell into complete shocked silence. Steve Harvey's face froze in an expression of absolute horror as he processed what he'd just heard and what it implied. Nicole's head whipped around to stare at Tasha, then at Marcus, her face showing confusion that was rapidly morphing into comprehension and devastation. Marcus went pale, then red, his mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. James, Marcus's brother, looked between all the parties with dawning realization and fury. And Tasha, understanding too late what she'd just revealed and how she'd revealed it, looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. "What did you just say?" Nicole's voice was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence of the studio, everyone heard her clearly. Tasha tried to backtrack, stammering that it was a joke, a bad answer, she didn't mean anything by it. But Nicole wasn't looking at Tasha anymore. She was looking at Marcus, searching his face, and what she saw there told her everything she needed to know. His expression wasn't confusion or innocence, it was guilt and panic and the look of someone who'd just been caught. "Marcus, what is she talking about? Why would she say that?" Nicole's voice was getting louder, panic and anger mixing with the devastation. Harvey, recognizing that he was witnessing a catastrophic revelation happening in real time, immediately stopped the game. "Hold on, everybody, stop right now. We need to pause everything and figure out what's happening here." But Nicole was beyond pausing, beyond processing this slowly. The pieces were clicking together too fast. Marcus's weird behavior about this taping, his insistence on who should be on the team, the way he'd interacted with Tasha, her fumbling answers about family connections, and now this statement that made horrible sense of everything else. "She's not your cousin, is she?" Nicole's voice was shaking with the force of holding back emotions too big to contain. "You've been cheating on me, with her. And you brought her here, you brought your mistress to a family event and expected me to just not notice, to just play along with your lies." Marcus tried to speak, tried to explain or deny or something, but Nicole wasn't done. Her voice rose to a shout that echoed through the studio. "You brought your side chick to Family Feud and put her on the same team as your wife. What is wrong with you?" "What kind of person does that?" Harvey, who had seen many shocking moments in his career but nothing quite like this, was speechless for one of the few times in his life. His face showed a mixture of shock, anger at Marcus, and deep sympathy for Nicole. Finally finding his voice, he spoke with barely controlled fury. "Cut cameras, clear the studio right now. Everyone out except these folks and essential staff. This is not for public consumption." The audience was quickly ushered out, many people crying or looking shocked, all of them having just witnessed one of the most painful moments imaginable. Once the studio was cleared, the full confrontation erupted. Nicole turned on Marcus with years of trust destroyed in seconds. How long have you been sleeping with her?" Marcus, knowing there was no way out, provided the devastating truth. 2.5 years. Nicole made a sound like she'd been physically struck, a gasp of pain so raw that everyone in the room flinched. 2.5 years? Our entire marriage, our children, our life together, all while you were with her. And you thought you could bring her here, that you could actually pull this off?" She turned to Tasha, seeing her fully for the first time as the woman who'd been sleeping with her husband. "Did you know he was married? That he has a wife and children at home?" Tasha, who'd been told a very different story by Marcus, responded with her own confusion and hurt. "He told me you were separated, that the divorce was almost final, that you knew about me and it was fine." Nicole's laugh was bitter and broken. "Separated? We live together, we sleep in the same bed every night. We were intimate 2 days ago. Does that sound separated to you?" Tasha's face crumpled as she realized the extent to which Marcus had lied to her as well. "You told me you weren't sleeping with her anymore, that the marriage was dead, that you were just waiting for the paperwork." Both women turned to Marcus, who stood there facing the consequences of his deceptions to both of them, caught in lies so extensive that there was no explanation that could make any of it acceptable. Harvey, recovering from his initial shock, addressed Marcus with barely contained disgust. "Brother, I have seen some messed up situations in my time, but this might take the prize. You convinced your mistress to come on Family Feud pretending to be your cousin. You expected your wife to just go along with meeting this family member without getting suspicious, and you thought you could actually get away with this. What were you thinking?" Marcus tried to explain, his words tumbling out in desperate justification. "I thought I could control it, thought I could keep them from interacting too much, thought I could manage the situation for just one afternoon." Steve's response was immediate and harsh. "You thought you could control having your wife and your side chick on the same stage, on the same team for hours. That's not confidence, that's delusion. That's narcissism on a level I've rarely seen." He turned to Nicole. "I am so deeply sorry that you're experiencing this in this way in this place. You deserve to learn about your husband's affair in private, with support around you, not on national television surrounded by strangers and cameras." Nicole was beyond caring about where she was or who was watching. "I need to know everything right now. Where did you meet her? How often do you see her? Have there been others? Does she know about our children? Have you taken her to our house? I need the complete truth, because clearly nothing you've told me for the past 2.5 years has been real." Marcus, finally forced to be honest, provided details that each felt like another wound. He'd met Tasha at a work event. They'd been seeing each other multiple times a week. She was the only affair, but there had been close calls with other women. Yes, she knew about the children, but he'd minimized his family life to her. No, he'd never taken her to their house, but they'd been together in hotels and at her apartment. Each answer was devastating, revealing a depth of deception and betrayal that Nicole had never imagined her husband capable of. Tasha, processing her own betrayal, confronted Marcus as well. You lied to me about everything. Your marriage isn't dead, you weren't planning to leave her, you've been playing both of us this entire time. How could you be so cruel? Marcus had no good answers, just hollow apologies that satisfied neither woman. Steve asked the question that everyone was thinking. Marcus, what was your end game here? Did you actually think you could maintain both relationships forever? Did you think bringing them together on a game show was somehow going to work out? Marcus's answer revealed the depth of his narcissism and denial. I thought I could make it work. I thought I could keep them both happy, keep both relationships going. I didn't want to lose either of them. Nicole's response was fierce. We're not possessions you get to keep or lose. We're human beings who deserved honesty and respect, and you gave us neither. I'm done. This marriage is over. Steve, recognizing that both women needed support and that Marcus needed to leave, made a decisive call. Marcus, you need to leave this building right now. Your wife and your mistress both deserve space away from you to process what just happened without you trying to explain or manipulate or make yourself feel better. Marcus tried to protest, wanting to stay and fix things, but Steve was immovable. I'm not asking, I'm telling you. You've done enough damage today. Go. Security escorted Marcus out of the building while Nicole, Tasha, James, and Deshawn remained in the private room. Once Marcus was gone, an unexpected thing happened. Nicole and Tasha, both devastated and betrayed by the same man, began talking to each other not as enemies, but as fellow victims of Marcus's manipulation and lies. Nicole asked Tasha to tell her everything, and Tasha, guilt-ridden and realizing she'd been complicit in hurting an innocent woman even if she hadn't known the full truth, provided details about the affair, about Marcus's lies to her, about the promises he'd made that she now understood had been fabrications. Did you love him? Nicole asked quietly. Tasha nodded, tears streaming down her face. I thought I did, but I don't think I loved the real him. I loved who he pretended to be with me. Just like you probably loved who he pretended to be with you. Nicole absorbed this, recognizing the painful truth in Tasha's words. The two women sat together for over an hour, comparing stories, filling in gaps in each other's understanding of Marcus's deceptions, realizing that he'd been lying to both of them about almost everything. They discovered that Marcus had told Tasha his marriage was sexless and cold, while telling Nicole that work stress was affecting his libido. He told Tasha that Nicole was controlling and demanding, while telling Nicole that Tasha was just a work friend he occasionally mentioned. He'd compartmentalized so effectively that both women had believed completely different narratives about who he was and what his life looked like. Steve Harvey, checking on them after giving them time to process, found them sitting together, not friends exactly but united in their betrayal and their recognition that Marcus was the villain in this story, not each other. He addressed both women with compassion. What happened here today is unprecedented and awful, but I want you both to know something important. Neither of you is to blame for Marcus's choices. Nicole, you trusted your husband, which is what you're supposed to do in marriage. Tasha, you believed what you were told by someone who lied convincingly. Marcus is the one who lied to both of you, who manipulated both of you, and who brought you together in this horrible way. The episode was never going to air in any form. The situation was too raw, too painful, too invasive to broadcast. The show scrapped all footage and never spoke publicly about what had happened, though rumors inevitably spread through industry channels about the shocking Family Feud taping that had to be completely destroyed. 3 months after that devastating day, Nicole and Tasha had both made significant changes in their lives. Nicole had filed for divorce immediately, refusing Marcus's attempts at reconciliation and moving forward with ending their marriage. She'd told her children age-appropriate truths about why their parents were separating, started therapy to process the betrayal and public humiliation, and leaned heavily on family and friends for support. Tasha had ended things with Marcus permanently, blocked him on all platforms, and was working through her own guilt and pain in therapy, processing both her role as the other woman and her own victimization by Marcus's lies. The two women had stayed in contact, not as close friends, but as people bonded by shared experience and mutual understanding. When Steve Harvey reached out to both women 3 months later to see how they were doing, and whether they'd be willing to participate in a follow-up conversation about their experience, both agreed, feeling that if their painful story could help others recognize manipulation or find courage to leave deceptive relationships, something meaningful could come from their trauma. The interview, filmed separately with Nicole and Tasha, showed two women at very different points in similar healing journeys. Nicole spoke first about the 3 months since discovery. The first month was absolute hell. The betrayal was devastating enough, but the public nature of it, the fact that everyone knew, that people at my work and my kids' school had heard about it, that added layers of humiliation and trauma that made everything so much harder. She continued, "But I've also experienced incredible support. My family and friends rallied around me. My kids have been resilient even though this has been hard for them, and I've discovered strength I didn't know I had. I'm rebuilding my life without Marcus, and I'm realizing that I'm actually happier and healthier without the weight of his lies and manipulation." Steve asked Nicole about the experience of meeting Tasha, of discovering the affair through such a shocking revelation. "In the moment, I wanted to hate her, wanted to blame her for destroying my marriage. But as we talked, I realized that Marcus destroyed our marriage through his choices. Tasha was lied to just like I was, manipulated just like I was. She's not my enemy, Marcus is." Nicole addressed directly the question many people had. "Some people have asked why I'm not angrier at Tasha, why I don't blame her more. The answer is that while I wish she'd been more skeptical of Marcus's claims about his marriage being over, I understand how skilled manipulators can be at lying. Marcus lied to me for 2.5 years while I lived with him, shared a bed with him, raised children with him. If I didn't catch on to his lies, how could I expect her to?" In her separate interview, Tasha spoke about her own complex journey. "I've had to face some hard truths about myself, about why I was willing to be with someone who claimed to be married but separated, about the signs I ignored or explained away because I wanted to believe Marcus's version of events." She continued with painful honesty, "I was the other woman, and even though I didn't know the full truth, I still participated in hurting Nicole and her children. I have to live with that guilt, have to accept that my choices, even based on lies I was told, still caused real harm to real people." Tasha explained what she'd learned. "I've learned to trust actions over words, to verify claims rather than just accepting them, and to recognize that when someone's story about their relationship sounds too convenient or explains away too many concerns, it's probably not true. Marcus's story about his marriage being essentially over but staying together for appearances should have been a red flag, but I wanted to believe him." Steve asked both women, in their separate interviews, what message they wanted to share with others. Nicole's message was primarily for betrayed partners. "If you discover infidelity in your relationship, know that it's not your fault, that you're not stupid for trusting your partner, and that you deserve better. Whether you choose to stay and rebuild or leave and start over, make sure it's what you want, not what others think you should do. For me, leaving was the only option after the extent of Marcus's lies and manipulation became clear." Tasha's message was for people who might find themselves in her position. If you're involved with someone who claims to be separated or planning to leave their spouse, verify it. Ask to meet the spouse, ask to see divorce paperwork, look for concrete evidence that what they're telling you is true. And if they're not willing to provide that evidence or if their story keeps changing, walk away because you're being lied to. 6 months after the disastrous Family Feud taping, a documentary filmmaker who'd heard about the story through industry contacts reached out to Nicole, Tasha, and Steve to see if they'd be willing to participate in a documentary about infidelity, manipulation, and the specific phenomenon of people maintaining elaborate double lives. All three agreed, recognizing that the story was already out there in rumor form and that telling it truthfully and thoughtfully could be educational. The documentary, which aired 9 months after the original incident, featured Nicole and Tasha telling their stories in full, with Steve providing commentary about what he'd witnessed and what lessons could be drawn. The documentary explored the psychology of people like Marcus who maintain double lives, explaining that it often involves compartmentalization, narcissistic personality traits, pathological lying, and an inflated sense of their own ability to control situations and people. It examined warning signs of affairs and deception, helping viewers recognize red flags in their own relationships. Most significantly, it provided a nuanced look at the other woman phenomenon, showing that women like Tasha are often victims of manipulation themselves, lied to by men who are skilled at deception, though that doesn't absolve them of responsibility for participating in affairs even unwittingly. The response to the documentary was overwhelming, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of being deceived, of discovering affairs, or of being the other woman man without knowing the full truth of the situation. 1 year after Marcus's double life exploded on that Family Feud stage, Nicole and Tasha appeared together for the documentary's final segment, showing the unlikely bond that had formed between two women connected by shared betrayal. They spoke about their ongoing healing, about lessons learned, about how their lives had changed. Nicole shared that her divorce was final, that she'd started dating again cautiously, and that her children were adjusting to the new normal. Tasha shared that she'd taken a break from dating entirely to work on herself, had changed jobs to get away from the real estate industry where she'd met Marcus, and was slowly rebuilding her self-worth and trust in her own judgment. Most remarkably, they spoke about the strength they'd found in each other, not as best friends but as allies who understood each other's pain in ways no one else could. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd end up being friendly with my husband's mistress, I would have thought they were crazy, Nicole said with a slight smile. But Tasha and I were both victims of the same manipulator, and there's a bond in that shared experience. Tasha added, Nicole had every right to hate me, to blame me, to refuse to ever speak to me. The fact that she's been able to see me as a person who was also hurt rather than just as the other woman, that's shown me a level of grace and strength I hope to emulate in my own life. The documentary concluded with Steve Harvey sharing his reflections on what he'd witnessed and what it taught him. The situation with Marcus, Nicole, and Tasha was the most shocking thing I've seen in my career, and it taught me several important lessons. First, that people who maintain double lives are not master manipulators who are smarter than everyone else. They're actually desperate, broken people who have convinced themselves they can control the uncontrollable. Marcus's decision to bring his wife and mistress together on a game show wasn't brilliant strategy. It was profound delusion and narcissism. He continued, second, infidelity doesn't just hurt the betrayed spouse, it hurts everyone touched by it, including the other woman who's often being lied to as well. Tasha thought she was in a relationship with someone leaving his marriage, when the reality was she was being used and deceived by someone who had no intention of leaving. Steve's final message was powerful. If you're thinking about having an affair, if you're maintaining a double life, if you're lying to multiple people to get what you want, understand that it will eventually collapse. It always does. And when it does, the damage will be catastrophic for everyone involved, including you. The temporary pleasure or excitement is not worth the permanent destruction. Before we close this explosive story, I need you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because stories like Marcus, Nicole, and Tasha's remind us that affairs built on lies and compartmentalization will inevitably collapse, that bringing together the people we've been deceiving is guaranteed disaster, and that the truth, no matter how carefully we try to manage it, will eventually force its way into the light in ways we never anticipated. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below about the importance of honesty in relationships or about recognizing manipulation and deception. And remember that if you're living a double life, if you're lying to multiple people, if you think you can maintain separate worlds indefinitely, you're wrong. The walls will come down, the lies will be exposed, and the damage when it happens will be far worse than facing the truth would have been. Marcus Washington thought he was smart enough, charming enough, and manipulative enough to bring his wife and mistress together on a game show team without getting caught. His hubris and narcissism led to one of the most devastating public revelations of infidelity imaginable, destroying his marriage, ending his affair, and traumatizing both women through the public nature of the discovery. Nicole discovered her husband's 2.5-year affair in the worst way possible, learning that the cousin she just met was actually the other woman, processing that betrayal in front of cameras and strangers. Tasha discovered she'd been lied to and used, that the man who'd promised to leave his wife had no such intention, and that she'd been complicit in hurting an innocent woman. A year later, both women have healed significantly, have found unexpected common ground, and have rebuilt their lives free from Marcus's lies and manipulation, proving that even the most devastating betrayals can be survived when we find the courage to face truth and demand better for ourselves.